Hello everybody, I'm Roddy, and I've just published a new article on my weblog entitled Aristotle's Radiator, or Hair Growth in Context, Carbon Dioxide, Serotonin, and the Global Cooling of Aging. This article was birthed out of writer's block, and I was writing a chapter in the upcoming book, The Baldness Field, and couldn't put it together, so I tried to synthesize it into an article, and this was the result. So I hope you enjoy it. Part 1, Aristotle's Radiator. Something that's lost within the complex realm of discussing pattern baldness is the actual function of hair. While I plan to cover the topic in my upcoming free book, The Baldness Field, it might be nice to compile some of my thoughts here, as I'm not sure when the book will be completed. As for the function of hair, a good place to start might be connecting the dots between the metabolic rate and the evolutionary tendency to proportionally increase the brain size in relation to the body size, cephalization. For instance, M.A. Hoffman found that the brain weight was a linear function of the product of cephalization and basal metabolic rate. Interestingly, elephants, who have a larger degree of cephalization than humans, are extremely intelligent and can grow head hair. The highly evolved human brain is a locus of intense heat production and accounts for 20% of the oxygen consumption in adults and 50% of the oxygen consumption in children under 4 years of age. Famously, Aristotle believed that because heat rises and the scalp was blanketed with a rich vascular network, the brain was well suited to act as a radiator. To Aristotle, it was clear that intelligence and sensation stemmed from the heart. All cerebral processes are sensitive to temperature fluctuations, with even a mild decrease in temperature causing inflammation. It appears that to protect our evolutionarily advanced hot brain, nature developed thousands of streaming mini-organs to blanket the scalp. While hair follicles have a multitude of functions ranging from sensory antennae to camouflage, the most relevant function related to the genesis of pattern baldness might be their function as dynamic insulators for the brain. Part 2, Pigment, Light, and Thermoregulation. Hair follicles are conditioned by a few different types of cells, including mast cells, keratin-producing keratinocytes, collagen-producing fibroblasts, and melanin-producing melanocytes. In addition to being responsible for the color of eyes, skin, and hair, the pigment, melanin, makes a significant contribution to the hair follicle's thermal insulation by absorbing sunlight and trapping radiant heat. In aging, melanin tends to be lost from hair, and in 2001, Paz and Tobin found that gray and white hair follicles went through morphological changes to compensate for the reduced thermal insulatory properties of melanin. In an attempt to explain the loss of melanin with aging, the free radical theory of graying was introduced by Arkadel in 2006. In their article, the group detailed that melanocytes were particularly sensitive to reductive stress, or a reduction-oxidation balance that favored the reduced electron-carrying form of nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide NADH over the oxidized electron-free form NAD+, that is mainly produced within the mitochondria. It appears that when the redox balance shifts towards reduction, electrons are excessively donated to melanin, which has an antioxidant function, causing the gradual loss of pigment over time. Besides thyroid that regulates a cell's defenses against free radical damage, helping to maintain the oxidized NAD+ to NADH ratio, light and temperature appear to be central to melanocyte health. For example, in 1998, a younger et al. Found that light activated melanocytes, causing the group to call hair follicles photosensitive UV receptors. Even though the melanocytes within the hair follicle are not directly exposed to UV light in the basal layer of the hair follicle, the communication system between keratinocytes and melanocytes orients itself towards the UV exposure, acting as an efficient fiber optic system that transmutes light. Similar to light, the melanocyte synthesis of melanin appears to be temperature dependent, as Kim et al. Discovered in 2003. While subjecting melanocytes to hotter temperatures increased melanin synthesis, the group found that lower temperatures induced hypopigmentation and a steady drop-off of melanin production. In addition to the exogenous heat from the environment, the hair follicle's mitochondrial metabolism strongly contributes to overall heat production. This is a quote from a Vidali paper in 2013, and they say, "In contrast to glycolysis and gluminolysis, intra-mitochondrial redox processes strongly contribute to the overall heat production. Therefore, changes in the measured heat rate indicate an increase-decrease of electron transfer rate in the mitochondrial chain of hair follicles." Taken together, it appears that a warm, sunny climate, along with our hot brains, induces the production of melanin. In return, melanin traps exogenous radiant heat, helping to insulate the head. Moreover, melanin serves as an important role in regulating hair follicle growth by buffering reductive stress, suggesting that excessive free radical damage, a lack of light, or a reduced body temperature might not only be involved in the development of white and gray hair, but also ordinary baldness. Part 3, Carbon Dioxide, Serotonin, and the Global Cooling of Aging. The temperature of any organ is dependent on the blood it's receiving, which delivers sugar, oxygen, and other nutrients to cells to make energy and carbon dioxide through the mitochondria. In return, carbon dioxide functions as a potent vasodilator, widening the blood vessels and increasing the delivery of nutrients to tissues in a reciprocal process. Additionally, similar to melanin, carbon dioxide is also an antioxidant or electron withdrawing agent, favoring the oxidized NAD+ to NADH redox balance. In stress and aging, there's a tendency to produce proportionally more lactic acid from glucose than carbon dioxide, affecting the extra and intracellular pH of cells. As lactic acid displaces carbon dioxide in the cell, the intracellular pH, which is low under the influence of carbon dioxide, keeping cells slightly acidic, is increased. In response to the increased pH, serotonin, which is produced primarily in the intestine in proportion to the amount of irritation and bacteria, is liberated from the blood platelets and other cells where it's inactive into the blood. Consistent with its essential role in mammalian hibernation, serotonin sends an organism into a state of torpor by suppressing mitochondrial energy metabolism, constricting the flow of blood, and reducing the temperature. For example, upon injecting serotonin into rats, Alexandrin et al. Found that serotonin rapidly decreased local cerebral blood flow by almost 30%. In another experiment, a serotonin injection induced a dramatic fall in the brain ATP level, followed by a marked increase in the brain lactate content. Two other hormones involved in pattern baldness, aldosterone, which is released from the adrenal glands, and the pituitary hormone prolactin, are increased by serotonin. Additionally, serotonin increases the parathyroid gland's release of parathyroid hormone that in excess can overload cells with calcium. For instance, under the influence of parathyroid hormone, soft tissues such as the arteries tend to accumulate calcium, leading to arterial stiffness. In 2014, Egak et al. Noted that pattern baldness might be an indicator of arterial stiffness in asymptomatic young adults. Moreover, arterial stiffness may precede and predict the future development of hypertension, which is strongly associated with developing pattern baldness. In Fujida's 1991 paper, Calcium, Parathyroids, and Aging, he says all cell death is characterized by an increase of intracellular calcium. To Fujita, aging is in the background of diseases such as hypertension, arteriosclerosis, diabetes, and dementia, which all involve inappropriate calcium accumulation. A few years later, McCann published his paper, The Nitric Oxide Hypothesis of Aging, which complements Fujida's thoughts as intracellular calcium turns on nitric oxide, suppressing energy metabolism and accelerating the age of any tissue. While there isn't much research on the role of nitric oxide specifically in pattern baldness, Trub noted that stressed hair follicles produce nitric oxide, which can damage the stem cells necessary for hair follicle regeneration. This is from a paper by Trub in 2003, and he says keratinocytes themselves may respond to physiochemical stress from UVR, besides irritants and pollutants, by producing radical oxygen species and nitric oxide, and by releasing pro-inflammatory cytokines, eventually leading to the injury of the putative site of follicular stem cells and superficial portion of the hair follicle. More specifically, nitric oxide blocks mitochondrial energy metabolism, which Tang et al. Found to be essential for the high energy supply needed for the differentiation of stem cells into hair follicles. And this is from the Tang et al. Paper in 2016, and they say, upon hair follicle stem cell differentiation, mitochondria are elongated with a more abundant cristae and show higher activity, accompanying with activated aerobic respiration, differentiated cells for higher energy supply. Also, dysfunction in the mitochondrial respiration delays hair regeneration upon injury. In addition to blocking the mitochondrial energy metabolism, nitric oxide activates the enzyme that produces prostaglandins from the polyunsaturated fat arachidonic acid. A type of prostaglandin, prostaglandin D2, was found to be elevated in the balding portion of men's scalps in 2012. I think the polyunsaturated fats and the intensity of nitric oxide production to some degree explain the disparity of baldness between individuals. For example, a person's fat tissue reflects the type of dietary fat they've been consuming over a lifetime, and the presence of polyunsaturated fats was found to be a critical signal switching the regulation of nitric oxide tone from physiological to pathological. As for measuring the amount of nitric oxide in the system, the body temperature might be a good estimate. For example, in 2014, Pereira et al. Found that the lower the body temperature, the higher the concentration of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide rises when the thyroid function is suppressed, and the outstanding feature of low thyroid function is reduced body temperature and slow heart rate. The brain temperature correlates well with the body temperature, although it is often slightly higher. While there have been a few investigations into the specific temperature of the balding scalp, I haven't seen any experiments that measured the scalp temperature over the course of a day, which would be needed to represent the natural circadian rhythm of the body temperature. Part 4. It's hard to stay oxidized in a reducing world. I think the realization that hair is part of an integrated system responding to the environment could potentially shift the conversation away from the tendency to categorize pattern baldness as something people have or don't have. Another way of looking at it might be that everyone is balding at different rates as a consequence of aging and the accumulation of stressors over a lifetime. For example, in 1996, Guerrero et al. Said, this is a quote from a 1996 Guerrero paper, and they say, as androgenic alopecia is a very common condition and displays a large variety in the rate of progression, apparently normal people may be in fact in early stages of baldness. Similarly, in Trub's 2001 write-up, he said, aging did not appear to follow a perfectly regular course over time. Periods of stability, or even partial remission, alternated with periods of more marked evolution, perhaps reflected the influence of individual factors such as the subject's general health, lifestyle, and risk factors for accelerated aging. If a person lives long enough, they will most likely experience some degree of so-called male pattern baldness, and if pattern baldness is experienced in early age, it is a phenomenon of accelerated or premature aging. I think this idea is crystallized by the phenomena of neonatal pattern baldness, which was mentioned by James B. Hamilton in his original 1951 paper on pattern baldness. He says, soon after birth, a marked alopecia develops in many babies in the same areas that become bald in adult men. That is, in the frontoparietal and frontal areas, and even over the tonsure. This process continues for weeks or months and occurs in both sexes. While hairs are still being lost, new hairs appear on the surface of the scalp, and by the end of the first or second year, most children have a completely hairy scalp. Previously, I've speculated that neonatal pattern baldness was related to an increase in prolactin upon exposure to oxygen-rich environment upon delivery. Something I overlooked was that newborns can experience hypothermia upon delivery, which adds to the cumulative stress of being born. The fact that newborns regenerate their head hair, I think, represents their robust metabolism slightly before the onslaught of environmental factors that lead to the lifelong decline of the rate of metabolism. Often people ask me if their pattern baldness can be reversed. I think the infant overcoming pattern baldness is evidence that it always can be, although the intervention has to be proportionally greater than the degeneration that has already taken place. For example, a young person who is losing hair might be able to remedy it by eating more calcium and supplementing with vitamins D and K2. An older person might have to quit their job, get a divorce, change their nutrition, take thyroid, get their vitamin D level up, and move to Hawaii. Part of the problem with discussing the complex biochemical web of pattern baldness and the many problems associated with it is the lingering mind virus of finasteride. The 1997 release of finasteride has convinced so many people that not only are bad genes and male hormones responsible for pattern baldness, but that the problem can be solved with a single substance. Massively contributing to this mind virus is the confabulatory way people talk about baldness on the internet, i.e., I saw a homeless person yesterday with hair, and they obviously don't subscribe to your dietary recommendations, therefore you're an idiot. Just to clarify, I think it's the physiology of the person regulating the hair growth, and an empirical approach would be to measure the blood of said homeless man with great head hair. A hypothetical finding might be that a wealthy balding businessman was objectively more stressed than a homeless man with hair. I mentioned that the flow of blood to the scalp is impaired in this article, and over the last few years there's been a resurgence in the idea that massage is a valid and effective therapy for alleviating pattern baldness. While it is a bit difficult to quantify, as I imagine everyone's massage technique is different, and I would think that just becoming proactive in some way can help break a person out of the vicious cycle of stress and inflammation, I think when massaging helps, it might be from reducing the concentration of prostaglandins or inducing an injury, which can sometimes lead to regeneration. Just to be completely clear, I've received many emails from people who have said that vigorously massaging their scalps made their hair loss worse. And for what it's worth, I'm not sure how safe kneading inflamed scalp tissue is. My biggest concern with a massage-centric approach is that it doesn't address the systemic nature of pattern baldness and the potential serious health problems down the road, e.g. heart disease, prostate cancer, etc. Lastly, some of the rationale used to justify the need for mechanical intervention can be accomplished by increasing the thyroid function and carbon dioxide, such as reducing fibrosis. Painting a more holistic picture of pattern baldness that includes the function of hair as insulation for a hot brain in relation to the intensity of the systemic energy production hopefully allows for a better understanding of how pattern baldness develops, along with a greater level of confidence for experimentation. Unfortunately, there are many things in the environment working against the balding individual, including the massive subculture that has an ideological commitment to enforcing the genetic androgen hypothesis. This life is ultimately a losing attempt to remain oxidized in a reducing world. However, I think the basic therapies such as thyroid, aspirin, vitamin D, vitamin K2, DHEA, sugars, gelatin, well-cooked white button mushrooms, sweet orange juice, not tart or sour, coffee with meals, salt, antibiotics such as penicillin, VK, erythromycin, minocycline, saturated fats, and red light by helping to increase carbon dioxide and lower serotonin, parathyroid hormone, nitric oxide, and related hormones can greatly increase the quality of life, restore hair growth, and be protective against a long list of ailments associated with pattern baldness. If those interventions were not enough, keeping in mind that some of the therapies have extensive ceilings, e.g. grains of thyroid, grams of aspirin, milligrams of K2, experimenting with topical carbonic anhydrase inhibitors such as T3, testosterone, progesterone, and DHEA might be worthwhile. So that's it for me, guys. Thank you so much for listening. You can find all of the references on DannyRuddy.com, and you can just click on the article title. I sincerely appreciate you listening. If you enjoyed this reading, please hit that like button and subscribe. I'm going to try to release more content steadily, and I have an amazing viewership / listenership, so I sincerely appreciate it. You guys are incredible. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.